Lincoln Mitchell is a national political correspondent for the New York Observer. He has been with us throughout the campaign. Let's talk about Kasich. There is talk that on the Republican side, Ted Cruz is gaining ground, as is John Kasich. Is Donald Trump fading, or are the other two just rising?
Well, I think a little of both, obviously. Trump was never scoring 50%, 50%, 50%. And we are now moving into a part of the country where John Kasich should be strong. John Kasich should be able to finish second in Michigan. He should be able to win Ohio. He should be able to expand that support to other parts of the Midwest. So that will damage Trump. And it is certainly possible that the Trump act is wearing thin. We have no real evidence of that, but it must happen sooner or later.
If Trump scores big tomorrow, is it over for the Republicans until the convention?
Only if they want it to be. I mean, the Stop Trump movement was, as far as I can see, it's become a 48-hour story. There's no strategy behind this. If you're serious about stopping Trump, you have to ask the question, how do we win a substantial chunk of the delegates in California? What's the strategy for doing that? Can we find a favorite son to run in New York? Now what you're hearing is scrambling. Let's throw $10 million here, which doesn't make a huge impact when you're running against a guy with basically an infinite amount of money. Let's pressure somebody to drop out for a reason that doesn't altogether make sense. Trump is on path, right, if he wins tomorrow, is on a path to have certainly a big plurality and potentially a majority, but it's not guaranteed. However, the Republican leadership has to do a better job of stopping it, or else he will get there before the convention.
On the Democratic side, everyone is saying this race is tighter than the polls showing. Is anybody talking about an upset, though, for Bernie Sanders?
In Michigan?
Yes.
Well, certainly not in Mississippi, right?
Right.
In Michigan, it may be tighter than the polls show. Bernie Sanders has to break 45% in Michigan for two reasons. One, we're in the part of the campaign where delegate counts matter. And I think if you could identify a few flaws in the Sanders campaign, and they've done some things really right, including some really powerful messaging around the economy, but one of their flaws is they don't have a delegate count strategy. They walked away from the Deep South, where Hillary Clinton, who was always going to win those states, is winning them by much larger margins than she might have. Now in Michigan, the delegate count becomes important because there's a lot of delegates at stake, but also the Sanders narrative becomes important. If he can fight Hillary Clinton almost to a standstill, let's say he loses with 46% of the vote, then he can make the appeal that then he can make the argument that I'm not just appealing in these kind of all-white liberal enclaves.
But when we were talking about Barack Obama versus Hillary Clinton in 2007, one of the things that emerged was that Hillary Clinton had an agenda, and she had people that she wanted an Obama administration to protect. What, going forward, does Bernie Sanders want if Hillary Clinton becomes the nominee?
It's hard to know because Bernie Sanders has a long history as an elected official, and he's done some very good things and stood for some very good positions. He doesn't have a long history as an insider horse trader type. So what does somebody like that want, particularly when this is his last bite of the presidential apple? He is too old to run the next time. He's talked about political revolution in this very kind of campaigny, amorphous terms, but he hasn't put any flesh on it.
Can he get the things that he's campaigned on? In other words, free college tuition? Is that something that is even doable in Washington with the political climate being the way it is?
Well, it would be doable if he sweeps in big Democratic majorities. That clip that you showed, you can't get a Republican Congress to do that. They will risk losing their seats. And the way the districts are gerrymandered, it's not much of a risk. If he is the nominee, and that's a big if, and if he wins by a big enough majority that he brings in a Democratic Congress, we can move towards some of those things. But that seems unlikely regardless of whoever the Democratic nominee is. Even if they get elected, is going to have a tough time working with Congress.
And lastly, before we go, if Donald Trump starts to fade, do you see him horse trading with delegates, trying to perhaps form an alliance with somebody like a Cruz? Probably no. Rubio, possibly, or Kasich?
I would say yes to all three, right? One thing that Donald Trump has said since he started this campaign and for decades before is he's a negotiator, right? He knows the art of the deal. Well, he's never made these kind of political deals before, but it's hard to see Donald Trump not being tempted to try.
Lincoln Mitchell, national political correspondent, New York Observer. Thanks for being with us again.
Thank you.